Sup, you beautiful bastards? Hope you're having a fantastic Wednesday. Welcome back to the Philip DeFranco Show, and let's just jump into it. And the first thing we're going to talk about today, we're going to kind of follow the theme of yesterday. We're going to start off light and then really get into it. And so the first thing I want to talk about today is the sports channel ESPN coming under fire. ESPN had a 28-hour programming marathon to promote fantasy football, which began Monday and faced criticism over a sketch that featured a white auctioneer holding up popsicle sticks with the faces of players to an audience of mostly white bidders. And many viewers found the sketch to be offensive and in bad taste, especially coming out of this weekend with Charlottesville. Saying we're coming out of a weekend where some people were protesting the removal of a Confederate icon, an event that was literally attended by the KKK, and then you put up something where primarily black athletes are being auctioned off. Jason Scales posting a clip of it with a caption, "So ESPN just did an auction sketch," and that video was eventually seen by the player actually being auctioned off in that clip, Odell Beckham Jr., who responded, speechless. And you had other NFL players such as Saints defensive end Cameron Jordan and Rams defensive end Dominique Easley. Jordan writing bad taste in whatever context was intended, Easley simply tweeting, "What the hell?" We also had people defending ESPN, saying the clips shared showing black players auctioned off were actually just taken out of context. This for two reasons. One, because there were also white players being auctioned off, auctioning off players including Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, Gronkowski. And two, people pointing out that this is simply an exaggerated version of how some people run their fantasy football drafts. For those not lame like myself and maybe you don't play fantasy football, people can draft their players in different ways. There's the classic snake system where you pick your players in order. There was the auction system like we're seeing here. But still, you had people like New York Daily News columnist Sean King tweeting, "Dear ESPN, apologize now for doing a sketch where you auctioned a black man off to the highest bidder." To which conservative radio host Dan O'Donnell tweeted, "Yes, liberal SJWs even think fantasy football is racist now." King responded, "No, I don't. I think how they did this was outrageous. Auctioning off black men with an auctioneer to an all-white audience looks bad." At which time, Kenny Mayne, an anchor for ESPN Sports Center, also told King on Twitter, "Fam, the optics aren't good. Agreed. But it was replicating fantasy football auctions. White's up for bid too. We appreciate you." And soon after, ESPN kind of issued an apology a little bit, releasing a statement saying auction drafts are a common part of fantasy football, and ESPN's segment replicated an auction draft with a diverse slate of top professional football players. Adding, "Without that context, we understand the optics could be portrayed as offensive and we apologize." And I have to say personally, I think what ESPN said here makes sense. The one exception is I don't think they needed to apologize, even though they kind of didn't. The way it looks on its surface, especially when edited only to show black players being auctioned off, especially to people that don't understand this style of drafting with fantasy sports, looks horrible. But when you take into account the full actual situation, I don't personally see anything offensive here. Let's save the pointing of fingers and shouting of "that's racist" to the actually racist things. When you go after the misconstrued and insignificant with large claims, it hurts the actually large claims and the actual large atrocities. Hate is very much real, but when you start saying that it is everywhere, people see it nowhere. But I pass the question off to you. I know we're people of different backgrounds, different life experiences. What's your thought here? Is this a swing and a miss, or do you understand where it's coming from? But from that, I want to share some stuff I love today, and today in awesome. And the first bit of awesome is actually something I shared yesterday during my live Q&A on DeFrancoElite.com. I do live streams there and release early content, plug. But there I was asked, what two movies on Netflix would you recommend right now? And I had to share it with more people because I want to talk about it. You're gonna have to put on captions, but I recommend to the highest degree the movies Train to Busan and the movie Tunnel. And I'm not even gonna tell you what the movies are about. Just search them out on Netflix, click play, experience. Then after you watch those movies, tweet me because I'd love to know what you think. Then we got an honest trailer for Guardians of the Galaxy 2. Then we got a preview of Sophie Turner and Maisie Williams for Carpool Karaoke. There's also the brand new vlog. Then we got a trailer for a movie that came out of nowhere called Rememory. It's one of the last roles Anton Yelchin took before he died. It has Peter Dinklage. The whole premise seems really trippy and cool. It's about pulling memories out of your actual brain and you can just see it on a screen, unfiltered. And it just looks fascinating. And remember, if you want to see the full versions of everything I just shared, the secret link of the day, anything at all, links as always are in the description down below. Then in HBO can't seem to win news, another episode of Game of Thrones has leaked. And once again, the actual leak of the episode was not because of hackers, but for some reason, the actual episode is available on demand to subscribers in Spanish and Nordic territories. HBO Europe issuing a statement saying, "The error appears to have originated with a third-party vendor and the episode was removed as soon as it was recognized." It remained up for 1 hour, and of course, as you'd expect, people are now torrenting the hell out of this thing. But something also interesting with this story, and I've been very surprised by this coming out. Reportedly, despite the leak of the Game of Thrones script, the actual Game of Thrones episode, it has not been affecting ratings. In fact, some of the episodes have been getting record viewing numbers. But anyway, I guess the main point of this story is do with this information as you will. I won't recommend you do anything, just know that this is a thing that happened. And then let's talk about Donald Trump. Yesterday, due to the timing, I was only able to add a small update where Donald Trump said that both sides were at fault in Charlottesville. This seeming to be the president going back to his first statement where he said many sides. But today, since we have some more time, let's jump through some of the points he made. We have Trump asked, why did he wait so long to comment on Charlottesville? And he says,
I wanted to make sure, unlike most politicians, that what I said was correct. Not make a quick statement.
And so at this point, the people that disagreed with Donald Trump here said, well, if you look at your history, pointing out all the times Donald Trump has thrown out claims that haven't been verified and then saying, oh, well, maybe we should look into it. His claims of 3 to 5 million illegal voters taking part in the election despite there being no proof, just claims with no evidence, the illegal Obama wiretap, which he later had to walk down and try to attribute to something else. There are whole pages dedicated to logging every time the president has done this. And as far as his statement being fine, people saying, well, then why did you then clarify and specify in a later speech if you actually thought that first one was fine? But okay, let's move forward. He is then asked, was this terrorism? And he responds,
driver of the car is a disgrace to himself, his family, and this country. And that is, you can call it terrorism, you can call it murder, you can call it whatever you want. I would just call it as the fastest one to come up with a good verdict. That's what I'd call it. Because there is a question. Is it murder? Is it terrorism? And then you get into legal semantics. The driver of the car is a murderer. And what he did was a horrible, horrible, inexcusable thing.
Okay, so he kind of said that it's terrorism, but then said it's definitely murder. Call it what you want. But at the very least, we have Attorney General Jeff Sessions saying on the record that this looks like domestic terrorism. Trump saying it's semantics, others saying that word specificity is very important, but okay, let's move forward. Then the reporter mentions that John McCain linked the violence to the alt-right, and this interaction happened with Trump.
Senator McCain, you mean the one who voted against Obamacare?
And he said
who is Senator? You mean Senator McCain who voted against us getting good health care?
McCain said that the alt-right is behind these attacks, and he linked that same group to those who perpetrated the attack in Charlottesville.
Well, I don't know. I can't tell you. I'm sure Senator McCain must know what he's talking about. But when you say the alt-right, define alt-right to me. You define it. Go ahead.
Well, I'm saying,
define it for me. Come on, let's go. Define it for me.
So now this is actually a point I want to hit on with the alt-right. A lot of people get confused when you reference the alt-right, and understandably so. As Milo Yiannopoulos, a man who has been credited in part to popularizing the alt-right, has even said, is that it's different now. Milo pointing out in an interview with Roaming Millennial that it started out different. In the beginning, you had a lot of conservatives that were not happy with the state of the current Republican Party. Also people that just wanted to meme and troll, and they were just anti-feminist, and they were anti-toxic SJW. And as far as the racist and the really toxic right, they were there, but they were seen as a minority to Milo. But he explains.
It had some racists in it, yes. We said it's 2 to 5%, you know? Like just a few crazies. Like the last tiny little speck remnants of the Klan, you know, just 200 people in Kentucky, who cares, you know? But the media, of course, took the term and started redefining it as another way of saying neo-Nazi or white supremacist. So, but with the inevitable result that it expelled from the movement all the people who weren't that, you know?
Right.
And so that's why it's hard for many to explain what the alt-right is because even people that are deemed the alt-right by the media are trying to explain that there are now two sides of it. And I think it's important that we hit on that note because as I mentioned yesterday, it is important to separate and denounce the extremists. And it doesn't help anyone on the left or the right to bulk all the people of one side into the extremist group. All that does is further alienate and radicalize the more moderate people. And so hopefully that helps you understand why there's some confusion and overextension and over-inclusion with the term alt-right. But that said, then the president goes on to blame what he calls the alt-left.
What about the alt-left that came charging at the, as you say, the alt-right? Do they have any semblance of guilt?
This is Senator McCain's statement.
Let me ask you this. What about the fact that they came charging with clubs in their hands, swinging clubs? Do they have any problem? I think they do. I watched those very closely, much more closely than you people watched it. And you have you had a group on one side that was bad, and you had a group on the other side that was also very violent. And nobody wants to say that, but I'll say it right now. You had a group on the other side that came charging in without a permit and they were very, very violent.
Okay, so at this point, I need to point out that the president is being very dismissive and very manipulative with his wording. He says they came in with clubs, swinging clubs. He makes it sound like a scene from Braveheart, that they're the enemy horde attacking the villagers. If you look through a bunch of video from Charlottesville, you can see examples of white nationalists, white supremacists starting fights. You can see examples of leftists, Antifa starting fights. A lot of the fighting seemed to really only be described as disconnected retribution attacks, and you had people on each side blaming the other side for starting it, despite the fact that so many people on both sides were prepped for a fight. But also to the president's claim that the counter-protesters were there without a permit, I have to use Trump's own words.
You are fake news.
The counter-protesters did have permits. They in fact had 2 permits. And it's kind of shocking you didn't realize that, since you were watching this very closely, more closely than all of us. Okay, but that aside, then the president tried to point out that there's a separation here, essentially saying they're not all baddies.
All of those people, excuse me, I've condemned neo-Nazis. I've condemned many different groups, but not all of those people were neo-Nazis, believe me. Not all of those people were white supremacists by any stretch.
You mean this group?
Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us!
And that group, if you're wondering, is the same group we talked about the past 2 days that were throwing out Nazi salutes, or at the very least being fine with people in their group throwing out Nazi salutes, shouting Sieg Heil in English. Also the argument that for many in that group that we just showed, that this was really about that Robert E. Lee statue. The guy that set it up, Jason Kessler, is a white nationalist. He's noted by many groups as a white supremacist. Kessler even wrote an article about the last time they were protesting the removal of the statue. And even there, he calls it a white nationalist demonstration. And he even had promotional materials for the event that looked like this. Unite the right. You will not replace us. A pivotal movement for the pro-white movement in America. Nowhere on there do I see a ... Also, this is actually about the statue. And it was the president's argument that there was one bad group, another bad group, that's what we saw. It seemed to anger a lot of people, including many Republicans. Senator Marco Rubio saying, it's very important for the nation to hear the president describe the events in Charlottesville for what they are, a terror attack by white supremacists. The organizers of the events which inspired and led to the Charlottesville terror attack are 100% to blame for a number of reasons. They are adherents of an evil ideology which argues certain people are inferior because of race, ethnicity, or nations of origin. When an entire movement is built on anger and hatred towards people different than yourself, it justifies and ultimately leads to violence against them. These groups today use the same symbols and the same arguments of the Nazis and the KKK. Groups responsible for some of the worst crimes against humanity ever, Mr. President. You cannot allow white supremacists to share only part of the blame. They support the idea which has cost the nation and world so much pain. The white supremacy groups will see being assigned only 50% of the blame as a win. We cannot allow this old evil to be resurrected. And Senator McCain writing, there's no moral equivalency between racists and Americans standing up to defy hate and bigotry. The President of the United States should say so. The Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, also speaking out, though not naming the President, saying we must be clear, white supremacy is repulsive. This bigotry is counter to all this country stands for. There can be no moral ambiguity. You also had Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell also not naming Trump, but saying, we can have no tolerance for an ideology of racial hatred. There are no good neo-Nazis. And those who espouse their views are not supporters of American ideals and freedoms. We all have a responsibility to stand against hate and violence wherever it raises its evil head. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham saying, I, along many others, do not endorse this moral equivalency. Many Republicans will fight back against the idea that the party of Lincoln has a welcome mat out for the David Dukes of the world. David Duke, of course, a former Grand Wizard of the KKK, a white nationalist who ran for Senate in 2016. Also a man who, after Trump's speech, thanked the president. And then at one point at the press conference, Donald Trump stopped focusing specifically on the violence and started talking about Robert E. Lee and that we're trying to erase history.
This week it's Robert E. Lee. I noticed that Stonewall Jackson's coming down. I wonder, is it George Washington next week? And is it Thomas Jefferson the week after? You know, you really do have to ask yourself, where does it stop?
We are living in the weirdest time. We used to see headlines, Donald Trump attacks Rosie O'Donnell. Donald Trump slams Ted Cruz. But today you could understandably and accurately put out a headline that reads, Donald Trump goes after George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. Yes, our forefathers are not perfect people. They are products and people existing in a different time period, and that does not excuse slavery. But to equate George Washington and Thomas Jefferson to a man who fought against the Union, a man who fought against the country we are now living in, and that's that's aside from the argument that removing this statue, which is going to end up in a museum or end up with a private collector who most likely will then put it in a museum, it doesn't hide history, it just does not openly celebrate the negative bad parts of it. It puts it in a place where you can understand the context and the situation of the time, and it's not, yay, Robert E. Lee. The idea that that's erasing history is so silly. What's kind of funny is Robert E. Lee's family is okay with, one, the removal of these statues. Robert E. Lee V, the great-great-grandson of Robert E. Lee, saying, if they choose to take those statues down, fine. Maybe it's appropriate to have them in museums or to put them in some sort of historical context in that regard. And the family of Robert E. Lee issuing a statement saying, General Lee's life was about duty, honor, and country. At the end of the Civil War, he implored the nation to come together to heal our wounds and to move forward to become a more unified nation. He would have never tolerated the hateful words and violent actions of white supremacists, the KKK, or neo-Nazis. And then the press conference ended, and a lot of white nationalists were very happy, and pretty much everyone else was not. Soon after this press conference, an unnamed source from the White House said that that was not the plan. Reports saying the president was supposed to just make a few statements about infrastructure and then kick to other members of the administration to take questions. So it appears that the president went way off book here, and that is something that probably explains the video and pictures of General John Kelly, the new chief of staff for Donald Trump. They went viral saying, this is the picture of a man filled with regret. And there's actual video of him like nodding his head when he thinks Trump hits a good point, and then wincing when he thinks that it's maybe not the best thing. Although we're not inside of his head, maybe he winced for a different reason. Also following the press conference, it appears that little mooch-sized hole in our hearts might be about to be filled. And that's because today Hope Hicks was placed as interim White House communications director. She's 28 years old. She has worked with the Trump team for years. She was the senior communications advisor. Before that, she was also a PR rep for the Trump Organization. And it said she's helped the president shape parts of his messages as part of her role as communications advisor. So I guess good luck to you, Hope. And that's where I'm going to end talking about this today. It still does boggle my mind that there is this much debate over a situation where it was a white nationalist rally where the KKK, white nationalists, side by side, an event where one of those white nationalists drove his car through people, maiming many, killing one. And it makes me sad that I'm arguing with facts, and I know part of that will not be effective. And this is something that alt-righter, white nationalist Richard Spencer hit on in a speech for Charlottesville. He's explaining why young people are the future of this movement. He says, millennials are arising in a period when no one at the dinner table are connected to the Second World War. That might seem meaningless, but it is absolutely profound and meaningful. It means they're able to get out from this massive black cloud, this massive anvil of guilt that has been weighing down our people. This great black cloud that hangs over us called Hitler or Auschwitz or the Holocaust or what have you. We don't need to question the accuracy of the history because at the end of the day, facts don't matter. And that's why it's so important to talk about this. People are so emotionally disconnected from history, from facts. History that shows us not only what human beings were capable of, but what they are capable of now. And in a world and a nation where people are more and more not sure of what the hell is actually happening, what is real, where people shout fake news towards actual fake news and fake news to just things they don't agree with. A thing we've seen from the president in the same tweets where he's lying to us. And so that's why we talk about it, because we cannot go down this road again. And it's part of the reason of why I'm making this and why I'm putting this out to you, despite of all the horrible shit that comes my way because of it, because it's important enough. And that's actually where I'm gonna leave today's show. Of course, whether you agree or disagree, I always love to see what you're writing in those comments down below. But yeah, that's where I'm gonna end today's show. And remember, if you liked this video, you like what I try and do on this channel, hit that like button. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button. Also, if you missed yesterday's Philip DeFranco show, you wanna catch up, click or tap right there to watch that. Or if you wanna see today's brand new behind the scenes vlog, click or tap right there to watch that. But that said, of course, as always, my name's Philip DeFranco. You've just been filled in. I love yo faces, and I'll see you tomorrow.